"Dad, we can't keep checking on you every 5 minutes. You need to learn to take care of yourself." Those were the last words my daughter Linda spoke to me before she stopped calling altogether. I'm Harold Peterson, 78 years old, and 6 months. After burying my beloved wife Margaret, I discovered that losing her meant losing my entire family too. Let me tell you how a man can become invisible in his own life, forgotten by the very people he spent decades loving and supporting. Margaret and I were married for 52 years. She was the glue that held our family together, the one who remembered birthdays, organized holiday gatherings, and made sure our 3 children, Linda, Robert, and Susan, stayed connected to us and to each other. When the doctors told us she had pancreatic cancer, we knew our time was limited, but nothing could have prepared me for how completely my world would collapse. When she took her final breath, the funeral was well attended. Our children seemed genuinely grief-stricken, and I felt surrounded by love and support. Linda, my eldest at 54, promised to call me every day. Robert, 51, said he'd stop by every weekend to check on the house and help with anything I needed. Susan, the baby at 48, lived 3 states away but swore she'd visit monthly and that her teenage kids would call their grandpa regularly. For the first few weeks, they kept their promises. Linda called daily, though the conversations grew shorter. Each time, Robert showed up on Saturdays, but he seemed distracted, always checking his phone or mentioning other places he needed to be. Susan visited once, staying for an awkward afternoon, where she spent most of the time reorganizing Margaret's closet without asking if I was ready for that. But grief has a way of revealing people's true priorities, and slowly, painfully, I watched my children drift away like leaves in autumn wind. It started with small changes. Linda's daily calls became every other day, then twice a week, then weekly. When I'd mention feeling lonely or struggling with simple tasks Margaret used to handle, she'd sigh and say things like, "Dad, you're a grown man. You figured out how to live before Mum. You can figure it out again." Robert's weekend visits became bi-weekly, then monthly, then sporadic. When he did come by, he'd spend 20 minutes asking if I needed anything from the hardware store, fix one small thing around the house, and leave. He stopped staying for lunch, stopped sitting and talking about his job or his kids. I became just another item on his weekend to-do list. Susan's monthly visits stopped entirely after the 3rd one. She called occasionally, but always seemed rushed. "Dad, I'm so busy with the kids' activities and work. You understand, right? You raised 3 kids yourself. The grandchildren I'd helped raise, the ones who used to run to me with scraped knees and excited stories about school, gradually stopped coming around entirely. When I'd ask about them during the increasingly rare phone calls, my children would give me brief updates, as if I were a distant relative, rather than their grandfather. Jason made varsity soccer, Linda might mention in passing. Emma got accepted to state, Robert would add as an afterthought, but none of them thought to invite me to games or graduation ceremonies. I learned about my grandson's championship game from a Facebook post I saw at the library, and about my granddaughter's acceptance to college from a neighbor who'd heard it. Through the community grapevine, the holidays were the cruelest awakening. Thanksgiving came, and for the first time in over 50 years, I spent it alone. I kept waiting for someone to call, to invite me over, to remember that this was our first major holiday without Margaret. The phone never rang. I called Linda that evening. "How was your Thanksgiving, honey?" "Oh, it was great, Dad. The whole family was here. We missed you, of course." "You missed me, Linda? I wasn't invited." A long pause. "Well, Dad, we figured you'd want to start new traditions. You know, Find your own way to celebrate. My own way. I'm 78 years old, and you're my family. What new traditions was I supposed to start? Dad, please don't make this dramatic. We had Robert's in-laws, and Susan flew in with her kids. It would have been complicated to accommodate everyone. Complicated, that's what I had become. A complication in their lives, rather than the patriarch who had worked 2 jobs to put them all through college. Christmas was even worse. I spent Christmas Eve and Christmas Day completely alone. Surrounded by decorations Margaret and I had collected over 5 decades of marriage. I kept Margaret's tradition of making her famous sugar cookies, hoping someone might stop by. The cookies sat untouched until they went stale. On New Year's Eve, as I sat in my empty house listening to fireworks in the distance, I realized that somewhere in the 6 months since Margaret's death, I had become a ghost in my own family. The physical decline started shortly after. Without Margaret reminding me to take my medications, I began missing doses. Without her cooking nutritious meals, I survived on frozen dinners and whatever canned goods I could manage to open with my arthritic hands. The house that Margaret had kept spotless began to deteriorate along with my health. I fell in the bathroom one February morning, hitting my head on the sink. I lay there for 3 hours before I could get up, and another 2 hours before I worked up the courage to call Linda. Dad, what happened? Are you okay? I fell. I think I might have a concussion. Could you come check on me, or maybe take me to the doctor? Dad, it's Tuesday. I'm at work. Can't you call an ambulance if it's serious? Linda, I'm scared. I've been feeling dizzy for days, and now this fall. Look, Dad, I'll try to stop by this weekend if I can. In the meantime, maybe you should consider one of those life alert systems. That way you won't have to bother us every time something happens. Bother them. That's what my medical emergencies had become. Bother is, I ended up driving myself to the emergency room. Despite the dizziness and blurred vision, the doctor said I had a mild concussion and showed signs of malnutrition. When the nurse asked for an emergency contact, I gave them Linda's number. She never showed up. That's when I met Eleanor Martinelli, the woman who would save my life in more ways than one. Eleanor was 72, a retired nurse whose husband had died 2 years earlier. She lived 3 houses down from me, and I'd seen her working in her garden, but had never really talked to her beyond polite waves. When I returned from the hospital with a bandaged head and instructions for someone to check on me every few hours, she appeared at my door with a casserole and a determined expression. Harold, right, I'm Eleanor. I heard about your fall from Mrs. Patterson next door. She said your family couldn't make it to the hospital. Something about the way she said it, without judgment but with clear understanding, made me break down completely. I told this relative stranger about the loneliness, the isolation, the feeling that I'd become invisible to the people I'd devoted my life to raising. My dear man, Eleanor said, after I'd finished my pathetic tale, your children may have forgotten you, but you don't have to disappear. Not if you don't want to. Over the following weeks, Eleanor became the lifeline I didn't know I needed. She checked on me twice daily, helped me organize my medications, and taught me basic cooking skills so I could prepare decent meals. More importantly, she listened to my stories about Margaret, about raising my children, about the life I'd built and lost. You know what I think your problem is, Harold, she said one afternoon as we sat on my porch drinking coffee. What's that? You're waiting for permission to live. You're acting like your life ended when Margaret died and your children moved on. But you're still here, still breathing, still capable of having experiences and making memories. The question is, what are you going to do about it? Eleanor introduced me to a world I'd never imagined. She took me to the senior center, where I discovered a community of people who didn't see age as a barrier to friendship and activity. I joined a poker game that met every Wednesday, started attending a book club, and even learned to play bocce ball. More importantly, Eleanor showed me how to find purpose beyond my ungrateful children. We started volunteering together at the local food bank, and I discovered that my decades of experience managing a small business made me valuable in helping them organize their operations more efficiently. I also began visiting nursing homes, spending time with residents who had no family visitors. Having been forgotten myself, I understood the pain of invisibility, and I could offer these forgotten souls something precious: genuine attention and conversation. The transformation wasn't instant, but after 6 months of this new life, I realized I'd gone entire days without thinking about Linda, Robert, or Susan's neglect. I was busy, engaged, and surprisingly happy. That's when my phone rang on a random Thursday evening in September. "Dad, it's Linda. Listen, I've been thinking, and I feel bad that we haven't been as attentive as we should have been since Mum died." I almost laughed at the understatement. "Oh well, Robert's 52nd birthday is coming up, and we thought maybe you'd like to join us for dinner. You know, start reconnecting as a family." "That's nice of you to think of me, Linda. When is it?" "This Saturday at 6 p.m. Susan's flying in, and the grandkids will be there. It'll be just like old times. Just like old times, except for the 8 months of complete abandonment. I appreciate the invitation, Linda, but I have plans Saturday night." "Plans? Dad, what kind of plans could you possibly have?" "Eleanor and I are going to see the community theatre production of our town, and afterward we're meeting friends for late dinner." A long pause. "Eleanor? Who's Eleanor? And what friends?" "Eleanor is my neighbor and very good friend. As for friends, I've made quite a few at the senior center and through volunteer work." "Dad, you're volunteering? Since when?" "Since you abandoned me, I thought, but didn't say. Since I realized I had a lot more living to do." "Well, can't you reschedule? This is family." "Linda, where was this concern for family when I spent Thanksgiving alone? Where was it when I had a concussion and drove myself to the hospital? Was it during Christmas when I sat in this house by myself, hoping someone would remember I existed?" "Dad, that's not fair. We were adjusting to life without Mum, too. You were adjusting by forgetting I existed. I was adjusting by learning to exist without you." The conversation grew more heated, with Linda accusing me of being dramatic and unreasonable, but for the first time in months, I felt strong enough to defend myself. "Linda, I love you and your brothers. I always will. But I'm not going to drop my life anymore every time you remember you have a father." I hung up, feeling something I hadn't experienced in almost a year: self-respect. Within an hour, my phone was ringing constantly. Robert called, angry that I was punishing the family by choosing strangers over blood relatives. Susan called crying, saying she'd specifically planned her visit around seeing me. But here's what they didn't understand. I wasn't punishing anyone. I was finally living. The calls and guilt trips continued for weeks. My children seemed genuinely confused that I'd built a life that didn't revolve around waiting for their attention. They acted as if my new friendships and activities were a betrayal of our family rather than a natural response to their neglect. Eleanor watched this drama unfold with the wisdom of someone who'd seen it all before. "Harold, what do you think they want from you?" "I think they want me to go back to being the lonely, dependent old man who was grateful for any scraps of attention they threw my way. And are you willing to be that person?" "No, I'm not." The confrontation came to a head 3 weeks later, when all 3 of my children showed up at my house, unannounced on a Sunday afternoon. They'd clearly coordinated this intervention, and they looked shocked to find Eleanor and me returning from our weekly hiking group, both of us muddy and laughing about something that had happened on the trail. "Dad, we need to talk," Linda announced. "Of course, come in. Eleanor, would you like to stay?" "Actually, Harold, this is a family meeting," Robert said pointedly. Eleanor squeezed my hand. "I'll be at home if you need anything," she said, but her look conveyed that I was strong enough to handle this on my own. Once we were alone, my children launched into what felt like a rehearsed speech about how worried they were about my new behavior and my concerning attachment to Eleanor. "Dad, you've changed," Susan said. "You used to be so family-oriented, now you're running around with strangers, and you don't seem to care about us at all." "You're right, Susan. I have changed. 8 months of complete isolation will do that. To a person." "We weren't ignoring you," Linda protested. "We were dealing with our own grief, and I was dealing with mine. The difference is, I was dealing with it alone." Robert leaned forward. "Dad, we're here now. We want to rebuild our relationship. But you have to meet us halfway. Meet you halfway. For 8 months, I called you. I reached out, I asked for help. I invited myself to your celebrations. You made it clear I was a burden. Now that I've stopped waiting for your permission to live, suddenly you want a relationship. We're your children," Linda said. "We should be your priority. And I was your father long before Eleanor came into my life. Where was my priority status then?" What followed was a difficult conversation where my children finally admitted, reluctantly, that they'd expected me to simply fade into the background after Margaret died. They'd assumed I would become a quiet, undemanding presence who would be grateful for occasional visits and phone calls. "We thought you'd want to take it easy," Robert said. "Slow down, maybe watch TV, read books. Normal old person stuff. Normal old person stuff. Robert, I'm 78, not dead. And even if I were just sitting at home reading books, that didn't mean I wanted to do it in complete isolation." Susan started crying. "Dad, we're sorry. We didn't realize, we thought you were doing fine." "I wasn't doing fine. I was dying inside. If it weren't for Eleanor, I probably would have died literally too. That's when I told them about the fall, about the malnutrition diagnosis, about the nights I'd lain awake wondering if anyone would notice if I didn't wake up in the morning. For the first time since Margaret's funeral, I saw genuine remorse in their faces. "Dad, we had no idea it was that bad," Linda whispered. "You had no idea because you didn't want to know. It was easier to assume I was fine than to deal with the reality that I needed support." The tears and apologies that followed felt genuine. But I'd learned something important during my months of independence. Good intentions and emotional displays weren't enough to rebuild trust. "If you want a relationship with me," I told them, "it has to be a real relationship. Not one where you check in when it's convenient and disappear when I actually need something. And it has to be a relationship that includes the life I've built now." "What do you mean?" Susan asked. "I mean Eleanor isn't some phase I'm going through. She's a dear friend who was there when you weren't. The activities I do, the people I've met, the volunteering work, that's my life now. You can be part of it, but you can't expect me to abandon it for you." This was clearly not what they'd expected to hear. Over the following months, we slowly, carefully began rebuilding our relationship. But it was different now. I was different. I no longer waited by the phone, hoping for calls. I no longer cleared my schedule on the off chance one of them might visit. I no longer made their needs and wants the center of my universe. Linda started calling regularly again. but now our conversations were more balanced. She told me about her life, and I told her about mine. When she couldn't talk long because of work or family obligations, I understood because I had my own obligations. Robert began including me in family activities again, but he also started joining me for some of my activities. He came to a few book club meetings and even volunteered with me at the food bank once. Seeing me in my new element seemed to help him understand that I was the same person he'd always known, just living a fuller life. Susan made more effort to visit, and when she did, she genuinely seemed interested in meeting my friends and understanding my new routine. Her kids, my grandchildren, were initially shy around this more confident version of their grandfather, but they soon warmed up to stories about my adventures and volunteering work. The relationship with Eleanor deepened as well. What had started as neighborly concern had grown into genuine companionship. We discovered we both loved classical music and started attending symphony performances together. We both enjoyed traveling and began taking short trips to visit historical sites and scenic areas we'd always wanted to see. People in town began referring to us as a couple, and while we maintained separate homes and independence, there was definitely something special developing between us. Harold, Eleanor said one evening as we sat on her porch watching the sunset, "Do you ever regret the way things happened with your family?" "You mean, do I regret them abandoning me?" "No, I mean, do you regret that it took something so painful to lead you to this life?" I thought about that question for a long time. The truth was complicated. "I regret the pain," I said finally. "I regret the loneliness and the fear and the feeling that I didn't matter to anyone. But I don't regret who I became because of it. I don't regret meeting you, or finding my purpose again, or learning that I could build a meaningful life at 78 years old. So you wouldn't change it if you could." "I'd change my children's behavior, but I wouldn't change my response to it. They forced me to discover that I was stronger and more capable than I'd ever imagined. Today, at 79, my life looks nothing like I expected it would when Margaret died. I'm healthier, more active, and more socially connected than I've been in years. I have a loving relationship with Eleanor, meaningful friendships with people who value my company, and a sense of purpose through my volunteer work. My relationship with my children has stabilized into something more honest and balanced. They've learned to respect my independence and my new life, and I've learned to forgive their initial abandonment without forgetting the lesson it taught me. Just last week, Linda called to invite me to Jason's high school graduation. When I told her I couldn't make it because Eleanor and I had planned a weekend trip to Niagara Falls, she didn't guilt-trip me or accuse me of choosing strangers over family. Instead, she said, "Dad, I'm so glad you have such a full life. Could we maybe schedule a celebration dinner for Jason the following weekend when you're back?" That simple acknowledgement that my life and commitments mattered too represented how far we'd all come. The truth is, being forgotten by my family was devastating, but it was also liberating. It forced me to stop defining myself solely through my role as husband and father, and to rediscover who Harold Peterson was as an individual. I learned that loneliness isn't the same as being alone, and that family isn't just about blood relations. I learned that 78 is not too old to make new friends, find new love, or discover new purposes. Most importantly, I learned that other people's lack of appreciation for my worth didn't actually diminish that worth. Margaret always used to say that every ending is also a beginning. When she died, I thought my story was ending too. My children's abandonment seemed to confirm that I was becoming invisible, irrelevant, a burden to be managed rather than a person to be loved. But Eleanor helped me understand that I had confused the end of one chapter with the end of the whole book. Margaret's death was the end of our beautiful marriage. My children's initial neglect was the end of my role as the dependent patriarch waiting for their attention. But those endings made space for new beginnings, deep friendship, purposeful work, genuine community, and even unexpected romance. I think about all the elderly people who are sitting in their homes right now, feeling forgotten and useless, waiting for phones that rarely ring and visits that never come. I want them to know what I learned. You don't have to wait for permission to live. You don't have to earn love through suffering in silence. And you don't have to accept loneliness as the price of aging. Sometimes, the family that forgets you does you the greatest favor of all. They force you to remember yourself. Have you ever felt forgotten by your own family? Do you know an elderly person who might need someone to remind them of their worth? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Sometimes a simple act of kindness can change someone's entire world. If this story touched you, please subscribe for more real-life stories about resilience, community, and finding joy in unexpected places. From what city are you joining us today?